Hi guys, this is Chapter 3, Part 2 lecture. Let's begin by talking about some of the pieces of evidence for evolution. The biggest or nicest piece of evidence is when you can see what something living in the past looked like or what it used to look like, and that's a fossil. So this is something preserved from the past. What kinds do we have? Well, we have casts that are organisms that are now rock-like. Basically, this is called a cast. This is called an imprint of an organism that is no longer around, but we know what it looked like because it made an imprint in the rock. The rocks here made a cast of it. That is not a shell, that is a rock. Over here, sometimes they're preserved in an amber. So these are the three major types of fossils that you will probably find. What do we do with these fossils? Well, we want to know how old they are, and that gives us an idea of when things were taking place. All right. So the easiest way we can know how old is superpositioning. All right. Superpositioning basically tells us how old something is depending on how deep in the rock layer it's found. If it's found really deep, it's really old. If it's found towards the top, it's younger, basically. So the deeper it is, it means it was buried longer ago. This process of using superpositioning is a way of getting the relative age. You're comparing this fossil to that fossil, for example, or this fossil to that fossil, or that fossil to this fossil. So you're getting a relative age about how old something is. All right. Superpositioning gives us relative age. Absolute aging is when we use the radiometric, the half-life, and we throw it into a calculation, and there's a little more chemistry going on, and then we can get a numerical number. Absolute aging is more accurate. All right, it's more accurate. How do we absolute age things of today? We generally use two isotopes. We use carbon or we use potassium to age rocks. So that's commonly what we're doing nowadays. Potassium and carbon is how we're aging things. All right. The vast majority of species, they disappeared due to extinction. So many species are gone. How many are left on Earth today is a very small fraction of what could have been left on Earth. But since the Earth has constantly changed, it has selected 4 different species to survive. So over time, we're limited on the number we have today. We've had some mass extinction events. The most famous mass extinction event was the dinosaurs, the 66 million years ago. It was called the KT mass extinction event. I know we discussed this in a previous chapter, but I don't know if I gave you the name. K stands for I don't know why, but that's the Cretaceous, which starts with a C in real life. But the KT, the Cretaceous Tertiary Mass Extinction Event, it happened 66 million years ago. The most famous things to die in that event were dinosaurs. They were the most famous ones that died in that event. Most people think it was the dinosaurs are the ones that were hit the hardest, but actually marine organisms that suffered a bigger loss than dinosaurs. I believe more marine organisms died and perished than dinosaurs actually did. And why is that? That's because the Earth has a lot of water on it. What happened during that mass extinction event, in case you don't know? An asteroid about 6 miles long smashed into the Yucatan Peninsula area of Mexico. I believe it created a crater about 110 miles wide. So think of it, a 6 mile wide rock crashed into the earth. We got hit very hard. But like I said, the most famous things to die were the dinosaurs. But which organisms were mostly affected? It was a lot of the marine dwelling organisms, actually. They were more affected by it. Species that are vulnerable to extinction. We've talked about these in the past too. These are species that have they're more like specialist species. What's happening to the birds in Hawaii? Well, the birds in Hawaii, one of the things is their eggs are getting eaten by invasive species. Okay, their eggs are getting eaten by invasive species. They're also getting disease due to malaria. So a lot of things are happening. A lot of certain species are vulnerable. All right, especially land dwelling and endemic species. They're the most vulnerable. Endemic species, I just used the term a second ago, and these are species that are native to an area. So generally speaking, when we talk about equatorial areas and rainforests, we have certain organisms that live in specific parts of these forests. They're endemic. The sad part is if that forest or that rainforest changes just a little bit, their habitat is no longer good enough for them, and the species can go extinct. Island dwelling species are more vulnerable too, and same type of thing. They live on an island, which means they don't have a large landmass to just move over if their habitat gets changed. What is the biggest causer of extinction today? It's humans. It's habitat alteration, habitat changing, habitat loss, habitat destruction, habitat pollution. So the biggest cause of extinction today is us, humans. We are changing their habitat. So these, for example, here, these are the birds in Hawaii. This is the lemurs in Madagascar. These are the tortoises in the Galapagos Islands. These are all island dwelling species. Are they at a high risk of extinction? Yeah, they're at a high risk of extinction. Are they all endemic? Yep, they're endemic and they're island dwelling, which means they're at a very high risk of extinction, these particular organisms. So extinction happens every day, actually, naturally. There's a natural rate of extinction, and that's called the background extinction rate. So we have calculated over time, if you're not involving humans, organisms are going to go extinct on their own, whether we're involved or not. It's going to happen. Okay. And that's called the background extinction rate. What's happened with humans is we've increased the rate at which extinction is taking place by a great deal. All right. We've increased it at such a rapid rate that humans are currently right now causing a mass extinction event to currently take place on the earth. All right. So if you ever hear about a current mass extinction event, you're gonna be like, no, there hasn't been an asteroid smashed into the earth like what happened to the dinosaurs. That's not happening. But right now, global warming, methane release due to human causes, these are big time human effectors. This is us. Okay. This is what we are doing. So the most currently, if you heard of a mass extinction event, the answer is humans. And what are we doing? What is the most common reason things go extinct today? Humans changing the habitat of these organisms, or fragmenting it, cutting it into pieces, or polluting it. So when we mess with their habitat, we mess with nature's ability to select. All right. Today, things are. I just said this to you. They're going extinct at 100 to almost 1,000 times greater than where they should be. And what are the problems? Well, here's a list of things that cause it. But the number one, this is the main cause. Overharvesting. Yeah, if we let people go out fish all they want, they're going to overhunt and overharvest. You're going to be reading an excerpt about this during the chapter. Pollution of the air. I already said this. Polluting habitat. All right. A non-native species. So if we take a species from somewhere and bring it somewhere else, and it outcompetes, and then it can kill the natives. And the current one, climate change, is also goes back to habitat, because if you change climate, are you changing their ability to live in their habitat? Yeah, big time. So climate change has to do with altering the habitat also. Ecology studies how things interact. So this is a study of living and non-living things. All right. Some terms, some review terms: community, all the living things in an area, not just one species. Ecosystems, this is a review: biotic and abiotic, living and non-living things. All right. So ecology studies that. An ecosystem is a community that has living and non-living things around it. Sometimes you'll hear this term biosphere. This is the life sphere of the planet, basically. So all the life on the planet, all right, and all of its habitat here. Habitat, this is where organisms live, where they can live, an environment that is suitable for what they need. All right. And by the way, some people think of habitat as a large area. Some species need very large areas. Some species, like insects, do not. So habitat for something could be extremely small. It could be very large for another organism. It could be large for a hunting animal that needs a lot of space to find its food. This term niche, this is a pretty big word. It means a lot of things. The definition is its role in its community. Well, what the heck does that mean? That means how it uses its resources. What does it eat? Where does it live? Okay. Where is it in the food chain? Is it a top predator? Is it a producer of food? What is its role, basically? So a niche could mean many things. Two kinds of organisms: specialists and generalists. Well, specialists have narrow niches, which means they have they have less things that they can utilize. All right. So they don't utilize it, their resources are limited. So specialists eat like one kind of thing, for example. All right. So this bird here eats grubs out of trees. Well, if there's no more grubs in the trees, the species or this organism, their population could die off. Generalists, For example, they can eat a bunch of things. Humans, we're generalists. We can eat all kinds of things. We have vegetarians, we have pescatarians, we have carnivorians, we have people who only, there is people who only eat meat, believe it or not. We have all these different people out there. They can find different food sources. So survival is easier if you can eat different things. So generalists can survive a changing environment much better than a specialist can. Population density is how close things live together. All right. So there's three kinds of population distribution. All right. Random means trees are, in this case, trees are sporadic in all different areas. This one, uniform, they're spread out kind of equally. And finally, clumped distribution means there's little patches of area where you'll see more of them. Clumped is most common in nature, and that's because organisms, they clump in areas where there's resources. Like this is water. So you're going to have a lot of species going to an area where there's water and plants because there's food and there's water in the same place. Demographers, people who study basically four major concepts: death, birth, immigration, emigration, exiting, going in, and exiting. Immigration, I for in, E for exit. Mortality, natality, birth, death, entering, exiting. All right. How do you calculate this? Well, you got to take birth rate minus death rate. Okay. This is for population growth, that is. Birth rate minus death rate, all right, is the rate of natural increase. But then you need to include immigration versus emigration. So a positive growth rate, population is getting bigger. A negative growth rate, population is getting smaller. For example, some war-torn countries, their birth is low because they're in war. People are not making babies necessarily as much as they normally would. People are off fighting wars. Their death is high. People are not going into countries where they're in war. Immigration, low. Are people exiting those countries? Yes. So a war-torn country would have a population growth rate that's probably negative in some cases. It's getting smaller. Okay. Exponential growth in the animal and plant kingdom, it's also called, it leads to what's called biotic potential. If organisms don't have predators and they have all the resources they want and they're not worried about space, and they have all these ideal favorable conditions, well, they will grow exponentially. They will basically double every certain amount of time. And that's exponential growth. Beware, I've had students in the past on the AP test, and it talked to them about populations growing, and the graph did more something like this, a straight line, and in their answers on the AP test, they used the term exponential growth when it wasn't exponential growth. Exponential growth is going to form kind of like a J curve, all right? It's going to start, it's going to grow slowly, and then it gradually increases. So the slope of the tangent of the line tangent gets steeper and steeper and steeper, all right? So things are doubling at a set amount of time. That's exponential growth. So an organism's biotic potential is its life potential. So exponential growth is its life potential. But in nature, that's not real. They're limited to their growth. So that leads to this, leads to their carrying capacity. So they hit a maximum. So the population is kind of kept in check at a maximum. And that's because they don't have unlimited resources, unlimited space. And the things that dictate this are called limiting factors, things that limit the growth of the population. The maximum is called the carrying capacity. All right. And this type of growth is called a logistic growth. It forms like an S curve. You start growing rapidly, and then it starts teetering off because resources start to get limited and the population size is larger now. Density dependent versus density independent factors. So these are factors that living close together, it's going to have an effect on them. Okay, so if a lot of organisms live close together, well, some of them are going to get eaten. Predation takes place. If they're all spread out, it's harder to find food for a predator. All right. Disease. This just happened in New York when the coronavirus. New York, everybody lives on top of each other. They had a massive amount of people die due to the coronavirus because of how close together everybody is. So because people live so close together, that disease was density dependent. All right. Density independent means it doesn't really matter how far apart you guys live. If something crazy enough happens, it's going to affect everybody no matter where they live. So natural disasters, destroy in some cases huge landscapes of land, temperatures changing, climate change, those are independent of how close together they live. All right. Survivorship, three kinds of curves. Humans, we generally survive when we're young, and we go to a point where we start seeing people die, people start dying, and then we get very old and we start seeing a lot of deaths. So this is a type 1 survivorship curve for humans. We are called what's called a K selective. The K stands for carrying capacity. These are organisms that are generally around their carrying capacity. Why is it a K? Because carrying capacity in German starts with a K. So that's why they're called K selective. They're generally species that don't give birth to a lot of young. They give birth to one. They have a long gestation period. The parents generally nurture their young too. So they have, because they nurture them, they might have an increased chance of survival at a young age. And then you'll start seeing death as they get older. And then when they get super old, you'll start seeing a lot of death. Some species, like certain birds, they don't really necessarily have an age at which they start dying. Death occurs relatively the same at all ages, and you start seeing like a straight line. This is a type 2 curve. All right. So death is independent of age for the most part. Okay. And finally, our selected species, these ones, they reproduce at a very rapid rate. They give birth to a lot of, for example, they'll lay a lot of eggs. A lot of them die at a young age because they get eaten as babies. So if they give birth to a lot of babies, they're supplying food to a lot of species. So a lot of death happens at a young age, and then it kind of teeters off, and then it does this type of curve. So type 3 are selected species that have a lot of death occurring young. Type 1, very few deaths at a young age and more deaths towards the end, and they all end up getting too old and dying. And type 2, death is independent of age for the most part. Okay, it forms a straight line. And this just goes back to the central case. So what's happening in Hawaii? Well, this is an area where these birds habitate, all right? And mosquitoes made their way up to an area. They made their way up to a particular area, and they affected the habitat. They killed the birds there. But now, because it's getting warmer and warmer and warmer, look, the mosquitoes' ability to get to more areas of their habitat have increased. So now the habitat basically is going to have they're going to have mosquitoes in all areas of their habitat, which means now they're more susceptible to malaria and dying due to diseases passed on by insects or mosquitoes. So as climate changes, this is a big concept you need to pick up on. You're going to have more insects, and more insects usually means more transfer of disease. And we're going to stop there.